So I hope all of you have read today's newspapers. So due to bad weather, we are forced to change the schedule a bit here and there. But I hope all of you are safe. Yes. So as you can see in the screen, the first article is related to GS paper 2, sorry, GS paper 3, internal security, and GS paper 2, governance. Maoism or Naxalism is related to left-wing extremism. So just few days ago, I have showed you a mains question paper where the question was, why do or why local support is very essential for surviving of all these extreme organizations. The tree example I have said is the reason why the Maoism is surviving. The core is justice concept. The tribals, the Adivasis, yes, these people were not getting uh, justice. They were forced to get justice from extremists. Then the extremists have become an institution on themselves. So famously, Manmohan Singh, the Prime Minister of India, but back then made a statement. Naxalism is the biggest threat to India's internal security. If you see what the present Home Minister is trying to tell you is the Naxalism has come down to very few districts. So the so-called red corridor has been reduced to only 41 districts, right? And this is also an example of cooperative federalism, where all the chief ministers of various states, either chief secretaries or director general of polices, are coming together to reduce and fight this particular issue. Yes. So what can be the main questions in this particular topic, on this particular topic, according to you?
How cooperative federalism can play a role in combating the left-wing extremism?
Okay. The trend of Maoism in India. Okay. Only these two questions.
Maybe indirectly they can ask what are the various measures that can be administered to combat the left-wing extremism.
So can we frame it like this, where development or when development reaches the remotest corners, Naxalism will be eradicated? Comment. Or development is the antidote to Naxalism. Critically analyze.
Yes, sir.
Do you agree with that statement, that wherever development happens, automatically I think, Narayan, in the sense that has become an old question, right? The reasons for extremism and how it can affect India's development has been an old question. Now the thing is, how can we completely root it out from our society? So UPSC questions are more in a futuristic trend, right? So why even those 41? So how do we target those 41 and slowly eliminate them? If you see the timeline of the Indian Naxalism, this cooperative federalism, or where all the states coming and fighting together against Naxalism, is a 2000 trend. 2000 to 2010 they have done this. Majority of Naxalism has been either removed through encounters or they withered away. Now the trend is development. If development is reaching the remotest corners, if governance is reaching the remotest corners, automatically Naxalism won't have any space for survival, right? So that is where this particular part of the article, like special central assistance, funds, money, development, these things are more in discussion. They are not asking for new weapons alone, right? They are saying deployment of forces and development, right? Because weapons alone are not going to eradicate Naxalism. Winning hearts and minds is more important. That is the keyword. Right. So I hope the context of this particular article is evident to you, and the keywords is development, cooperative federalism, and how we are slowly removing them from the society. Yes. Any questions from this article? I'm not sure this article is in Hyderabad. Is it visible?
Yes, sir, visible.
So what is the importance of this article? There are one or two prelims questions in this particular article. The first one being, what is clean development mechanisms, CDM? I think we have discussed this briefly in the class, where Delhi Metro is a clean metro. That means it does not create any pollution. So if a industry is releasing a lot of pollution, let's say carbon dioxide, that company can come to the Delhi Metro and purchase carbon credits. So for every 10 trips, let's say for every 10 trips the Delhi Metro goes, okay, it is supposed to release 1,000 tons or 1,000 tons of carbon dioxide, okay, which it is not releasing. So instead of 1,000 carbon tons which are not released, Delhi Metro will have something called as carbon credit. So as mentioned in this article, one carbon credit is equal to 1 ton of carbon dioxide. So every 10 trips, one new carbon credit is achieved by the Delhi Metro. So then later what can Delhi Metro do? It can sell it to the industry which is releasing carbon dioxide. So that is known as clean development mechanism. One industry is saving the carbon dioxide, other industry is releasing the carbon dioxide. As a fine, indirectly it is paying some amount of money to the clean mechanisms. So if everybody is moving towards clean mechanisms, we will have more and more carbon credits, right? So that money can be used by the government to promote more cleaner and safer technologies. So it is discussed in Kyoto Protocol. So this is a prelims question more or less, not a mains question, and it's a old topic. Every year we know that Delhi Metro sells a lot of carbon credits. And Delhi is one of the first metros, or the first metro in the world to start selling carbon credits. What is the advantage?
The overall carbon footprint might reduce.
The overall carbon footprint might decrease, and it will also act as a motivator for investing in cleaner technologies. See, the initial cost of setting up a cleaner technology is very high, right? So you can get back your initial investments in one or the other way. Say for example 20 crores is a good amount of money for administrative cost of Delhi Metro. That is back to Delhi Metro by clean mechanisms, and it will offset the things. See, because not every company can go 100% clean. Just keep that much in mind. The clean development mechanism is Kyoto Protocol. Okay. So first we will see the editorial. Back in the game. What are the key takeaways from this particular article? Vaccine my 3. Okay.
India must focus on free trade negotiations, which US has a special. I'm unable to recollect the correct word. So it has a where it won't. It promotes free trade, where the Trump administration has suspended and that can be resumed for better trade options with the US.
So only those are the keywords that you pick up from this article. See, first one is what we have done immediately. The next one is where we are investing. The third one is also we are looking at multiple things. So though vaccine Maitri is the most obvious area that India and US are going to discuss, we are never going to forget that defense aspect. And lastly, defense, apart from defense aspect, we have to cooperate on a lot of things. So here what is happening is friends will have some issues but depending on the situation. Let's say in the peak of second wave, US is the same country which stopped sending this key ingredients or missions to India to create more vaccines. Why? They were having their own needs. So that did not make India and USA permanent enemies. It was only situational. Once the things came down, when the things are cooled down from March to September, okay, again we are on the back of back to the track of growth and collective development. Yes. So what India should do right now is when we have peacetime or normalcy, in those times we have to take as much as we can. We have to make sure that next time whenever there is a pandemic, we should not be dependent on any country. Atmanirbhar Bharat should be explored as much as possible in peace times. That is the biggest lesson, and that is exactly what Prime Minister is trying to do by pushing every opportunity we have, from vaccine Maitri all the way till climate change technology. Recently John Kerry came into India. Yes, do you think that was an accident? Indian diplomacy must have worked very hard to bring him to India and give us some promises that we will give both money and technology for sustainable growth. That is a good achievement. Supply chain resilience. So we are working on investing on supply chain. We are going to get new drones, new weapons. We may not get nuclear submarines like Australia in the coast, but we are getting other things. All these things have to be prioritized in the normalcy time. In situational issues or when times are bad, even friends will have some issues. Both India and USA also had issues during second wave. It's okay, totally fine. We will overcome that and we will invest in the right places. So we have to use everyone to make sure that India is Atma Nirbhar. Yes or no? That is the key takeaway. That energies has to be spent in the right direction. Okay. And what will happen next time when a pandemic or something happens? India is 100% ready. We have realized the potential of our own pharmaceutical companies. What they need is active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs. What they also need is, let's say, tools, missions, and all those things. So if we can get as many as them as possible during the peace times, we don't have to be dependent in the war time or issues time. Clear? So that's a story, simple story. You have to remember that in normal time, make the most out of it. In the war time, okay, you can compromise a little bit, but lessons have to be learned from every opportunity. Yes. What about this one? A needless row. What is the important takeaway from this particular article? What did you learn when you read this article? There are a lot of points, a lot of valuable points, right? I assume you have read this article.
Yes, sir. This law mandates the compulsory registration for all marriages, and also the act says that both boy and girl will have to register if they are above 21 years, and parents will have to register them in case of 18 years. And in that case that is specified, Seema versus Ashwini Kumar. In that case, that particular the court directed that the registration should be mandatory if boy is of 21 years of age and girl is of 18 years age. So what this law says is the child marriages are not void, but the marriage will be nullified when when any of, if girl or boy wants to approach and want to say they want to discontinue this marriage. So So the advantage is even if sometimes the even if the girl unknowingly or forcefully if married when at the age of 16 or 14, after reaching 18 she can appeal in the court that she is not interested anymore and can withdraw from marriage. This is the provision they are giving, sir.
At the age of 14?
Ah, no sir, 16, I'm sorry, 16.
Mhm. Okay. So if you are married at the age of 14 or 15, then there is no legal support from the system, right? It's an outright crime. But between 16 to 18, it's not 100% legal. At the same time, state do not try to intervene between these two ages. But if you have an issue, state will definitely intervene. But
Yes.
about the age of 18, you'll have a lot of say in your marriage. So what they are trying to tell you is, if a marriage is registered, whether from 16 to 18 or beyond, the biggest advantage is that will be used as a mechanism or a tool for the system to intervene and provide some kind of relief. Yes. uh, so the thing is, registering marriage is not equivalent to legalizing or giving a legal blessing to the marriage. It's a tool for the state. Let's say a 16-year-old girl is married by the parents, like forced by the parents to get married, right? After 17 or something, she realized that she is not happy and she have a legal recourse. At that time, if she goes to the court, then the court will ask, where is the proof? Then she might say, there is no proof. That leads to a lot of legal complications, and society has to come together to justify that. So sometimes society or morality prevails over constitutional morality. Society may not come forward to protect her because she is doing some anti-social thing according to them by going to the court. But if a 17-year-old girl marriage is registered, right, by default she has a document which says actually she was wife of someone, right, and she is not happy to stay in that particular place, and the court can easily get rid of her problems. But if there is no registration, her problems will only compound. So that is the single biggest advantage or prospect that Hindu editorial is trying to tell you, saying by why we should register the marriages. All the laws in the world cannot stop the child marriages or girl, marriage at a very young age, because it's not a problem of law, it's a problem of the societal understanding. Girl is still considered as a burden, girl is considered as a weight to the family, she has to be married very quickly. So as long as these problems prevail, even if you bring a lot of what legal remedies, it is not going to work. So simplest remedy is to give her some kind of tool to empower herself, right? And let's say there is a complaint, she's kicked out of the family because of the complaint. Who will take care of her? We as a state, we do not have enough tools, support systems, uh, you know to provide her alternative livelihood. Let's say a girl's hostel where she can stay there, away from her family, get herself empowered, educated, trained, and start her own life. As all of you know, a single woman is always having a lot of problems in the society, right? So even if you want to empower them outrightly, the state is not having all the 360-degree capability to take care of her. So families are the only place where they are getting some kind of solution. But if the family is the villain against you, then you don't have anywhere else to go. So we have to think from the other side of the story also. So that's a major thing, right? So a lot of social capital has to be invested. Let's say prime minister should promote this as much as he promotes Swachh Bharat, right? So such a huge moral figure like prime minister or someone of his caliber are the only people who can change the society to an extent, but not fully. Hmm. This is an article on blaming Nepal, right? So as a UPSC aspirant, when you read this particular article, what are the things that should come to your mind? Which river is called as Sorrow of Bengal? Sorry, Bihar. Sorrow of Bihar is which river? Okay. What is the nature of that river? So that's something you find in your geography NCERT. Nature of the river, in the sense, why Kosi creates a lot of sorrow. What is the reason? What is the primary reason that it causes a lot of pain? Very nice. So it's a standard.
Sir, it causes flood.
Yes, all rivers causes floods, right? But why Kosi? Like
That
if it. Mhm.
it causes annual floods, sir. So every year there's a flood because of that on fertile agricultural lands.
Technically speaking, even Musi in Hyderabad is creating annual floods, right? I mean, hypothetically speaking, the reason is I don't have a set path for Kosi River. It keeps on changing its direction. One day it is going in right direction. Next time it is changing bit to the left, or even further right. So the silt, the amount of silt that Kosi brings is, changing the path of the Kosi. So it brings a lot of sedimentary up from upstream. So again, that's pure geography. You will learn anyhow in the geography classes. So here what we can understand is interstate cooperation and intrastate cooperation are equally important. That means flood situation cannot be solved only from Indian side. International cooperation from Nepal and the India are equally important. So the author is saying that India has invested a good amount of energy both from state point of view and nation point of view, but the problem is the Nepal is not so enthusiastic about this particular issue. Yes. So he blames Nepal in multiple dimensions. This red highlight will show you that Nepal's attitude towards mutual issues like water sharing, flood control has been short of collaboration. So once this collaboration is achieved, only then the problem of Bihar can be solved. As long as we don't have international cooperation, we are not going to solve it. Why is it a problem? Because we have to spend huge amount of energy each and every year. Millions of dollars are spent on the aftermath of the floods, flood preparation. So unfortunately, no matter how well I am prepared, I cannot fight with the nature or the force of the nature. So the only long-term solution is to talk with Nepal and create a long-term solution. As long as I don't do that, these things will keep affecting us. And he also brings in this nice argument of Himalayan glaciers and green cover management. If I have to have perennial rivers or river management in this country, Himalayan glacier management and green cover management is equally important, and that comes with multiple multinational cooperation only. As you know, the Hindu Kush area, right? It involves around 10 countries and it feeds 10 major rivers of the entire Asia, and all of them are more or less perennial. So for future sake, we have to have this cooperation, and Indian government is pushing itself nicely, but somehow that collaboration is not top priority. Yes. So the final argument is we can blame Nepal as much as we can, but the thing is, as long as we don't achieve cooperation, Nepal is not going to see the advantage of mutual benefits. So that is where we should be working with Nepal on this particular aspect. Clear? How many waterways are there in this country? What about the rest of you? Do you think he's correct? Okay. What do you understand by the term social justice? And how is this article relevant for UPSC? Stopping short for, sorry, stopping short of social justice. Have you read this article? Okay. So there is a all India entrance exam called as NEET. You must be having an idea. This is about national eligibility for medical science, medical students, MBBS students for PG and all those things. So Tamil Nadu recently tried to bring in law which says some amount of seats should be reserved for students from Tamil Nadu who studied in government colleges or schools of Tamil Nadu. And there is a report which actually says that this NEET exam, this entrance exam has accelerated the inequalities. That means students who studied in Tamil schools, studied in government schools, or first generation learners, or people who belonging to low family or low income families, all these students are not getting good ranks in the NEET. People who are privileged are getting into getting access to the higher education. So such kind of entrance exams are actually accelerating the inequalities rather than reducing the inequalities. So that's point number one. The point number one is NEET exam with empirical data that report is arguing that is increasing inequalities in the society. Well-off people are getting educated, poor people are not getting access to higher education. This is one side of the coin. So what is the alternative suggestion given by the Tamil Nadu government? School or graduation score should be used as a eligibility criteria. Here the author argues that is also not perfect. Why? Admissions based on higher or secondary education marks is also not equitable. Government schools are not on par with private schools. The quality of access within the school education system is also unequal. So whether you put the NEET exam or you directly take the higher secondary marks also, anyway, the disadvantage of the student from the school level is continuing throughout his life. So both these methods are not going to bring any solution to the society to reduce inequalities as long as the day one, the inequality at the school level still continues. Next, point number two. Point number three, actually. Point number three, he discusses is government, I mean, NEET quota seats are there. Apart from this, private medical seats are there. Each and every private medical seat is costing around 1 crore rupee or something. So this clearly shows people with money can either get into NEET or buy a private medical seat. And people who are coming from government colleges or government schools are not going to get any further in their life unless the vast reform which is to be done at the basic level. This is his argument. No matter how much you try to support them, even if you put 7.5 reservation or 10% reservation from to the children studying from government schools, it is not going to make a huge difference because this is the real problem. Quality of education imparted in government schools, if that is rectified, they will be competitive enough or they will be worthy enough to fight with anyone at pan India level in any exam, or else the inequalities will keep on accumulating. People from well-off families who can afford coaching, training, and all those things, they will be doing good. People who cannot, they will stay at the lower rungs of the society. That is the core argument that he's trying to bring. Clear? So we don't need to go into much deeper prospects. The only thing is inequality, even at the entrance level exam or any other way, also is a real story. The reason is, if the foundations are weak, the building will be weak. If you rectify the foundations, the student will be self-empowered to take care of himself. Okay, next. So this is one more article about the love jihad, the narcotics jihad article. So this author is trying to bring in certain keywords. The first keyword is, why are we as a society so interested in certain terms like love jihad, narcotic jihad, but not focusing on the perennial problems like inequality, poverty, marginalization, corruption, ecological destruction, yes, disregard for rule of law. So why not these things are provoking the emotions of the people? Why are we not bothered about all these things, but we are so enthusiastic to jump into the narcotics jihad, love jihad? Are we bored with the routine things? Are we have we reached that apathy state? Or all the new terms make something, new terms create something very interesting? Or is it a political narrative? I think he discusses it about Habermas. So as you can see, only in this particular paragraphs, he says, only with the reasoned public debates, people will be discussing the right aspects. So if I want to discuss about poverty, if I want to discuss about inequality, someone somewhere will be offended. If I say, people from well-off families are sending their children to government public schools or private schools, but not to the public schools. Only poor people are sending their children to government schools. So this is affecting the private schools' vested interest. Yes or no? They have a lot of money. Lot of politicians are associated with the private schools. So there is a reason why public schools are willfully destroyed. While public schools are willfully destroyed, while the private sector schools thrives, because it has the power of media, money, plus politician support. It's not some random outcome. It's a willing failure. We don't send our children to public schools. That's by default. Okay, but public schools have the best of the teachers who are trained in DSC, rank holders. The best of the teachers are in public school, but the best of the students are going to the private schools. So why is this happening? Why nobody is discussing about it? Because we are not having a communicative rationality. We are not having reasoned public debates. It's a failed system. Why should government run schools? Or why not outsource it to the private sector? Why do you have to charge 2 lakh rupees for LKG? That is something beyond rational. I still don't understand that logic. Why someone has to spend 2 lakh rupees for LKG level? Like 10th class, maybe I will understand. For LKG, what is there for to teach at 2 lakh rupees per kid? Isn't it the main goal of government to start with to provide education to poor? Why are they now asking why rich? I didn't get the question. Yes, that is what exactly I'm saying, right? Nobody is asking the question. There is no accountability or there is no pressure on the government to reform the public sector schools. Yes, as long as no, the majority of the society do not have any, mm, outcome related to the public schools, we were happy to let the public schools be destroyed. Now that we have destroyed, we are asking why private sector is thriving. It's not the other way around. They are not asking why rich are not attending now. Okay, they're simply saying what is the primary reason why people are pushed away to the private schools. Okay, so this debate should have started 30 years ago, not today. Definitely 100% accepted. But before we realized that that schooling is a foundational thing, ASAR report, annual survey of education report, and all these things came, then we realized how much we have destroyed the public school system. Till then, slowly, year by year, it was getting destroyed, and system was focusing its energies elsewhere, right? So we can both blame the system and support it at the same time, right? So in this particular aspect, he's saying this communicative rationality of people having some kind of anticipation from the society or debate is or public reasoning is what leads to reforms. As long as we are not focused on the core areas, because most of us don't understand the problem of the core area until it's too late, right? Unless it's too late. For example, you take water. Providing municipal water or providing drinkable water is one of the responsibilities of the state. When is the last time you went to a public space or a tour or a trip and you thought of drinking from a municipal tap? Show me how many, show me 10 municipal taps in Hyderabad or in the locality you live. We stopped thinking about it totally. The first thought that comes to our mind is, where is mineral water bottle or mineral water packets? Yes or no? So a generation of Indians grew up without even realizing that availability of drinking water is a common good. It's a public good. It is supposed to be there. No, it has been totally replaced with mineral water bottle concept, and we were totally happy. I'm not blaming government or the private sector. Private sector saw an opportunity, whereas public sector totally ignored that responsibility. People are getting water somehow. But somewhere in between these two things, the truth is providing water is responsibility of the state, right? So I mean, before we realized that the mineral water problem, the mineral water bottles is a mafia, it's a problem, or the private sector schools are being dominated by vested interest, it's already too late. Now even if we ask for the system to provide some solution, the system cannot provide a solution overnight. It's too late. So that is why we have stopped discussing this, because we have a alternative, and majority of us can actually afford a mineral water bottle. What is there to spend 10 rupees? You spend 10 rupees in so many places. Why can't you buy a mineral water bottle? That is the simplest answer. So we choose to give easy answers, or we choose to go for easy rather than long-term solutions, right? So that is why, in my understanding, we actually don't discuss about these kind of problems, because these are all long-term problems. It takes a lot of energy, follow-up, and resources, right? So that's one important point you have to remember. People need to have that continued persuasion. When there is an issue, we shout for 1 or 2 days. After that, we ignore. But system have unlimited patience. It can wait as long as it can. Clear? I hope that makes some sense to your understanding. Yes. Then the rest all is you don't have to worry about it. He's typically trying to say the youth of Kerala should the youth of Kerala should take the responsibility on their own. They should not fall into this trap of communal issues. they should not fall into the trap of drugs, narcotics. We should work on the collective soul of Kerala. But I think the important direction here is this question: why are we not discussing important issues, and why discussion of narcotic jihad is easy? Because it's something useless. Yes, but it's easy to attract. Identity and public policy. So this is an article about data-driven policy making. What gets measured gets improved. So normally this is what we think. So in this article, they are trying to show that what gets measured may not get improved, because it's not that lack of data, it's the politics that drive public policy. So he takes a very simple example. If you see this particular para, I know that infant mortality and female literacy. If female literacy is high, infant mortality is low. If female literacy is high, mortality is low. That means number of women or children who will die at the time of delivery or in pregnancy are less. So literacy and deaths are inversely proportional. If literacy is less, deaths are high. Yes, if literacy is high, child marriages come down. I know all these facts. So education empowers the woman and it will lead to less number of deaths. So this is what he is trying to say. But in spite of knowing all these things, if you take one of the most empowered states like Kerala and Tamil Nadu, women empowerment is not 100% happening. The female labor force participation ratio in Kerala is less than that of Tamil Nadu. So how do we explain that contradiction? Kerala is having one of the highest literate populations in the country. One of the most empowered women in the country can be found in Kerala, but still it does not solve the female labor force participation issues. Okay, whether it's related to crimes against women or other issues. Recently Kerala was in the news. So many dowry deaths were happening. Then the chief minister of Kerala came and made the all the youth of the state promise that we won't take dowry. So dowry and Kerala. So that is the last place we actually expect the dowry to survive because of the empowerment. But still empowerment is only a myth. So he concludes by saying it's the politics and not the availability of the information that drives public policy. I know the information and nobody is asking the right questions. So again, I think we can link it to the same article. We can link it to the same question, right? The same logic. Everybody is doing it individually. Someone is taking dowry in Kerala at a independent level. So without knowing that all of us are taking, everyone is taking. It has become a social problem. And only when it hit the maximum limit, when people started dying because of dowry, we realized dowry has become a social evil. Till then, one or two here or there, we stopped asking the right questions and it survived, it thrived. We cannot blame the government for not waking up earlier, because only when things become uncontrollable or really a crime, the state will have a lot of focus. Till then, one case here, one case there, it doesn't make any impact on the system. Even the collective morality of the society, nobody was outraged with one woman's death over dowry. Probably if we actually hardly look at the newspapers throughout the country, I'm sure at least 3 or 4 women are killed purely because of dowry this day alone. But our collective apathy, yeah, totally fine. One in Gujarat, one in Andhra Pradesh, one in Tamil Nadu, it doesn't make any collective concerns. But one day, let's say 20 women died, then the headings will be totally different. That is the day we start looking at the issues very closely, right? So the political will is more important than the data. That is what Mr. Balakrishnan is trying to argue. I think the essence of the article is covered, but at the same time, we cannot totally say that data is not making any changes. Data definitely will make some change. Infant mortality rate, female mortality rate, all these things have come down drastically only because of measuring. Once we came to know that so many people are dying, so many women are dying, we worked on that. So many schemes, institutional deliveries are promoted. So lot of advantages have happened. But for total eradication, probably political will is needed. But for reduction, data should be definitely there. Only when we know we are doing something wrong, we will work on that. So what gets measured will get improved is true. But to total eradication, we need political support. Okay. And we can link it to Swachh Bharat Abhiyan also. Before Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, we knew as a nation around 60 to 70 crore people are defecating in open. 60 to 70 crore people are defecating in open every day. We knew that, but we didn't work. What actually worked is the political interest that Prime Minister has showed on creating this Swachh Bharat Abhiyan and more toilets. So the next generation grew up believing that, we have to go for only using public toilets or toilets. We should not go into open defecation. So that data-driven policy making did not work there, but it worked in political force. Now that we have the toilets, we need to identify how many toilets are being used, which districts are using more toilets, which districts are not using more toilets. So they are complementary to each other. Data-driven policy making. Clear? Yes. So China is not issuing visas to India, but India is more than willing to issue visas to China. So one thing we can understand here is China is trying to push India to come to the negotiation table about what? China wants to de-alienate. That means China wants to separate the border issues and other issues. There should be a clear line between China's issues and other issues. So this is what China is trying in relation to India. But what India is saying is it's a collective package. We are open to deal with other issues. We are flexible on other issues, but we won't completely or will never separate border issue and other issues. So for clear understanding, China, border and other issues. For India, border plus other issues. This is for India. You have to bring border to the table for anything. Without border, we are not continuing, or we are not going to continue in any other direction. Border plus others is what India is looking for. China wants to separate. Okay, why? We will discuss border. This is long term. So why stop others for the long term issues? So that is what he is trying to tell. Right? So that is why China and India have a different perspective. What is India's perspective? India is 100% correct. We cannot keep the border issues perennially, going on while we want to discuss about other issues. Whereas China's perspective is, let us discuss border issues slowly while we will discuss other issues. What is China's strategy here? If you look at this article here, China is doing all the groundwork, while we are nagging on the border issue. It has constructed a road link completely. Yes, it is developing all the infrastructure in the world to Tibet. So if there is ever a occupation or expansion towards India, it's very easy from Chinese side. So if you actually believe the China and say, okay, first we will discuss other issues, but not the border issues. In that gap, China will do all such activity. Okay, it will complete trains, bullet trains, military establishment, surveillance, drones, etc. It will set up all the groundwork. Then if you want to negotiate, China won't negotiate. Why? It has the higher advantage. It has the upper hand. Whenever China has the upper hand, it won't start negotiating. But if you believe China right now, it will create even further gap. Right? So I hope you see the contrast in China's strategy very clearly. We should not let China border issues be delineated from other core issues, and India is doing the right things by combining border plus other issue. Okay, so the People's Liberation Army of China is very proactive in the Tibet area. It is creating a lot of problems for India. Strategically, it has completed all the domination. It has laid new tracks, new military bases, surveillance. It has fully invested in the Tibet area. Now it's very hard for India to push away the China from this particular area. It has already done all the groundwork, and it does not want India to do the same. So that is why Indian government is very crystal clear in saying no border issues, no discussion. Only border issues we will discuss. First border, then anything else. China is saying first anything else, but later border. And lastly, this article, Chief Justice of India is backing 50% women's quota. All of us know this fact or this data is very, very important. Even after 75 years of independence, we have only 11.5% of the judges of Supreme Court as women, and very few women are actually in this particular field. So it's high time that there should be a moral change in the attitude to include more women, or there should be a policy, right? And present Chief Justice is very proactive. He has elevated some justices to the Supreme Court. One of them will be the first female Chief Justice of this nation. Right? So it's a self-explanatory article. So Karl Marx said, workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains. So he has paraphrased it to, women of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains. So even you can use this in your answer writing or essay as well. Okay. So any questions? No questions? Okay, then I will share value addition notes of today's discussion with some images.